Grab your cootie catcher and breathe in the scent of chalkboard erasers. We are heading back to the Scholastic Bookfair days once again. And this time I'm sharing the classic book Bunnicula by Deborah and James Howe, which has sold millions of copies since it was first published in 1979 and has been a beloved classic for quite a few generations of kids now. Just before we dive into this one, a couple of quick things. This is a nostalgic, fun video, and it's aimed at adults, not children. I will be spoiling the plot of this book as we go, so maybe just make an informed decision for yourself as to whether that's kind of what you're looking for. So the history of this book. Bunnicula, A Rabbit Tale of Mystery, is the story of Harold, a family dog, who has to adjust when his owners adopt a rabbit. But things take a turn when the rabbit exhibits some strange and potentially sinister behavior, and with Chester the cat's help, he investigates and tries to warn his family that the new member of their family is not all that he seems. The book was originally published by Athenaeum Books and later became a Scholastic Bookfair classic. It's been voted a teacher's top 100 book in the US and, of course, sold in many countries. It was written by Deborah and James Howe, who were a couple who met while both were studying acting at university, and they married and moved to New York together, where they worked in acting and writing. While watching old Dracula movies together, they came up with a running joke of Bunnicula, a vampire rabbit, and were encouraged by family to do something with the character. When Deborah got really sick with what seems to be complications from ameloblastoma, which is a bone tumor disease, in 1978, she and James decided to write Bunnicula because it made them laugh, which was kind of like therapeutic, you know? They wrote this book and the Teddy Bear's Scrapbook before Deborah died 11 months after her initial diagnosis. She was only 31 and did not live to see the book in print, but the book, her work, their work, won many awards. And a children's library attached to the hospital was dedicated to her. Bunnicula was very well received, and James went on to turn the book into a book series and then a play, and it was also made into a TV series as well, which he worked on. It's become a much-loved franchise. Later, he married and had a child, wrote many other books, and later divorced and came out as gay. It sounds like he's led an interesting life and is still writing books and plays and things like that today. So let's take a little look at this book. My copy is from Avon Camelot Publishers, and this orange and brown look. Even the floppy-eared dog and the rag rug is very kind of early 80s to me, and what I think of when someone mentions this book is this cover art right here. The first edition had less of an orange look and featured the soft lines of the artwork, but without the border that this one has. This was clearly designed to compete with the other series type books of this era that always had this kind of cover layout, you know, your Apple, your Scholastic print runs. We have the wonderful red and white dramatic font for the title. I love that. We have this little tagline at the top. Meet Harold the dog, Chester the cat, and a vampire bunny named ... Little shout out. There's a wonderful pony where I ride called Chester who has... he's a horse with a sense of humor and a lot of personality. So I often thought of him as I was reading this book or rereading this book. Anyway, on the cover, we also have this little star sticker that's excitedly exclaiming over 3 million books in print, which is pretty cool. Below, we have this gorgeous illustration by Alan Daniel, who is the illustrator for the cover and inner illustrations for the originals of this book, and most versions have his illustrations. I had to do a little bit of digging, but from what I can tell, Alan Daniel is a Canadian artist from Kitchener, Ontario. His website with his partner is danielart.ca, and he's not only illustrated various children's books and is a wonderful artist, but his artworks have also been featured on Canadian coins, so he's a national treasure. His name is credited on the Bunnicula books, but the Bunnicula books and series are not mentioned at all in connection with his name on his site or almost any others that he's featured on, which I kind of wondered if that's maybe something to do with the rights He maybe doesn't have the rights to the illustrations or something. I don't really know. It could be the wrong artist. So if you have some information and you want to correct me, let me know, because I'm very curious about this. But either way, I really love this kind of friendly art style with its sense of softness and movement, and the expressions are really funny and cute. And if you look up close, you can see that the bunny on the cover has little teeny bunny vampy fangs. Okay, so let's get into the plot. We open on an editor's note. So let me read a little bit of that to you. The book you're about to read was brought to my attention in a most unusual way. One Friday afternoon, just before closing time, I heard a scratching sound at the front door of my office. When I opened the door, there stood before me a sad-eyed, droopy-eared dog carrying a large, plain envelope in his mouth. He dropped it at my feet, gave me a soulful glance, and with a great, quiet dignity, sauntered away. So the note reads, "The enclosed story is true. It happened in this very town to me and the family with whom I reside. I've changed the names of the family in order to protect them, but in all other respects, everything you read here is factual." And he introduces himself as Harold. "I come to writing purely by chance. My full-time occupation is dog." So that's a little editor's note at the start, kind of implying that Harold wrote this himself and delivered it to, a journalist or a writer for it to be printed, which I love that. It sort of makes the story real for the reader, and it kind of crosses that fourth wall, or the kennel wall. I don't know what you'd call it in this case, but we learn here that Harold is a dignified soul and that we are reading his manuscript, which the author has published. He explains he lives with the Monroe family, mom, dad, and 2 boys, and Chester the cat, and his full-time occupation is dog, as we said. He tells us it all started one dark and stormy night when the family went out to see a movie, leaving him in charge of the house, which he prefers because people get a bit offended when you snore and lay on the floor at the cinema, which is true. Harold has a bit of a good old boy sort of tone. I really like him. He's a good dog. When the Monroe family returns, quote, "There they stood in the doorway, Toby and Pete and Mom and Dad Monroe. There was a flash of lightning, and in its glare I noticed that Mr. Monroe was carrying a little bundle, a bundle with tiny, glistening eyes." This is amusing to me. So the author explains something at this point. So at this point, I feel I must explain something. In our family, everyone treats everyone else with great respect for his or her intelligence. That goes for the animals as well as the people. Everything that happens to them is explained to us. It's never been just, "Good boy, Harold," or "Use the litter box, Chester," at our house. Oh no, with us it's, "Hey, Harold, Dad got a raise and now we're in a higher tax bracket." This just kind of tickled my funny bone. I think, now we see talking to our animals and having sort of conversations with them as talking to a member of the family or like a close companion or a friend. But there was definitely a time not that long ago when this would have been seen as sort of a weird way to look at things, or, less usual. So I find that kind of interesting. I feel like this book's sort of on the cusp of a different way of looking at animals. Which is kind of a minor thing, but that line about the tax bracket just tickles me, like that you're going to tell your dog you've gone up a tax bracket. I don't know. It's funny. So we learned that they arrived late at the cinema and opted to sit in the back row, where one of the boys found a blanket-wrapped box with a little dirt in it and a little black and white bunny inside. The only clue is some writing in an obscure Russian dialect, which they can't read, but Harold can because he's part Russian wolfhound way back in his family tree. It says, "Take good care of my baby." The mom goes to find food for it in the kitchen, and the 2 boys head off to build a rabbit house or a little hutch, and basically to argue with each other. Chester and Harold compare notes, but the cat is nonplussed by the whole thing. We get the inside skinny that Harold sleeps in Toby's room on account of him often having snacks and leftover bits of lunch in his room in a drawer. And apparently he regularly, why can't I say that today, bribes Harold with chocolate cake. That's kind of wild to me. Like, obviously, don't give your dog chocolate. Chocolate is toxic to quite a lot of animals. But it's a kind of cute running joke in this that he has those little, I think they're sort of like Hostess cupcakes, if you remember those, the chocolate ones with the cream filling. But I guess because of branding or whatever, they're never, mentioned by the brand. So the other little boy, Pete, is a bed hog and doesn't have snacks. So Pete argues that the rabbit should be kept in his room or sleep in his room because Harold sleeps in Toby's. Harold is not impressed. He basically picks Toby because Toby's a pushover. They decide diplomatically to keep the rabbit in the living room, and they start to think of names while Chester angles to get the milk that Mrs. Monroe has offered the bunny. They decide on Bunnicula because they found him at a showing of Dracula. Dad had suggested Mr. Johnson because that's the name of the cinema owner. And I kind of love this because a rabbit called Mr. Johnson is just really funny to me. And also, naming things is hard. It's not easy to pick out names for things. Something I struggle with personally. And then they all go to bed. Next, we learn about Chester. He's no ordinary cat, as if there's any such thing as an ordinary cat. He came to the house as a birthday gift for Dad, along with volumes of Dickens and G.K. Chesterton, from whom he gets his name, Chester Chesterton. And he loves to read mysteries and spooky stories. He's currently reading Edgar Allan Poe. And then he gets this eerie feeling and looks up from his book to see the rabbit watching him. And he sees that the rabbit's markings are in the shape of sort of like a widow's peak and cape. He hears strange music and feels a chill down his spine. But Chester realizes that their neighbor is just practicing the violin. He starts to relax when, in a flash of lightning, he sees the bunny has bared his teeth, and instead of 2 little chompers in front, he has 2 sharp fangs. So nothing more happens for a few days. Harold is annoyed that the new member of the family is drawing attention away from him, especially since the bunny doesn't play fetch or do anything interesting by his estimation. Chester is sleeping all day because he's up all night keeping an eye on the rabbit, because the rabbit sleeps all day. He's so grumpy in the mornings that Harold tells him to relax, but Chester says, no way. Bunnicula is a danger to the family. Harold asks why, but Chester has no real answer yet. Harold tries to play with Bunnicula, but he's not much fun. Then one day, Chester says that he saw something the night before. Bunnicula somehow mysteriously let himself out of his cage when Chester wasn't looking, without opening the door or breaking the wires. In fact, Chester was distracted by the pendulum on the clock in the hall. In fact, Chester was distracted by the pendulum on the clock in the hall. Anyway, he sees a light in the kitchen and then the sound of the fridge door closing. He pretends to sleep, and he sees Bunnicula exit the kitchen and take himself back to his little cage with a little smug grin on his rabbity face. Harold thinks that maybe Chester dreamed the whole thing, but then the next day, to quote the book, where's my little marker? Holy cow! Mr. Monroe yelped as he opened the refrigerator door. He took this funny-looking white thing out of the fridge and held it at arm's length. Peter, come down here. What is it? I whispered. Beats me, Chester answered. It looks like a white tomato. Very funny, I said as Pete came into the kitchen. Peter, have you been playing with your chemistry set in here? No, Dad. Why? I thought this might be one of your experiments. Do you know what it is? Gee, Dad, it looks like a white tomato. Just then, Mrs. Monroe and Toby came in the door. What's all the fuss about? Mrs. Monroe asked. We were just trying to figure out what this is. The tomato is white and completely dry. The family thinks it's weird, but dismiss it. Maybe it's just gone off in a strange way. But Chester tells Harold that he saw 2 little fang marks in it. Harold is distracted by the smell of cooking bacon, but Chester says that he has to stay up with him all night and he's concocting a plan. Now, Harold almost misses their meeting later that night because it's Friday and Toby is having a reading and snacking feast in his room. Toby teases him by offering him all the things he doesn't like and pretends that he's forgotten that he likes chocolate cupcakes. He says something that I like on page 39, actually. So I'll just quote that for you. I've always had trouble with words myself. Half the time they don't mean what I think they're going to. And then even when I do find out what they mean, I forget the next day anyway. You might say that I'm smart, but just not the scholarly type. I like that the book sort of recognizing that there are lots of ways of being smart, not just book smart. I feel like that's just a good message or a nice message. Either way, Toby tells him about Treasure Island, and Harold almost forgets to go downstairs. And when he does, Chester is annoyed that he's late and tells him that a parrot is not a type of umbrella, but a small bird with a big mouth. There's a funny bit here where Harold jumps up on the chair and knocks Chester out, and sort of hilarity ensues. And then we get down to business. Chester has been reading up on his subject. "This book and that rabbit," Chester replied. "Now tell me, Harold, have you noticed anything funny about that rabbit?" "No," I said, "but I've certainly noticed a lot of funny things about you recently." "Think about it. That rabbit sleeps all day. So do I. So do you. Furthermore, he's got funny little sharp teeth. So do I. So do you. Furthermore, he gets in and out of his cage by himself. What kind of rabbit can do that?" "A smart one," I said. "I could do it." "We're not talking about you, Harold. We're talking about the rabbit. Now, where did they find him?" "At the movies." "Yes, but what movie?" "Dracula," I said. "So?" "So," he said quickly, "remember the note around his neck? What language was it in?" "An obscure dialect of the Carpathian Mountain region," I answered smugly. He didn't know everything. "Aha," Chester said. "But what area of the Carpathian Mountain region?" "Area? What's an area?" I looked at him blankly. "Transylvania," he cried triumphantly. "And that proves my point." "What point? What are we talking about?" "And don't forget the white tomato. That's the most important of all." "But what?" "This book," said Chester, disregarding me, "tells us just what we need to know." "What?" I practically screamed. "What does it tell us? What does this book have to do with Bunnicula? What are you talking about?" So Chester has figured out that Bunnicula is a vampire, but instead of sucking blood, he sucks the juice and all of the color out of food. And he shows Harold a stash of colorless veggies that the rabbit has hidden under the couch. Right then, they hear a noise in the kitchen and know that Bunnicula is on the loose. They try to sneak up on him, but he manages to slip past them. In front of the fridge door is a mysterious object. They approach carefully and find a white zucchini. I really hate zucchini. It's one of my least favorite vegetables. It's so gross. Anyway. Next morning, the family awakes to screams. Harold thinks that Mr. Monroe, who comes running past, has been bitten by Bunnicula because his face is all white, but Chester explains that it's shaving cream. In the kitchen, all the fruit and vegetables have been turned white. They speculate that there's something wrong with the fridge, or maybe some kind of vegetable blight or DDT, which is very sort of, DDT is very topical for that era. I guess it's not something we talk about as much anymore with reforms to like DDT use and pesticide use. But anyway, that's a side thing. Chester knows the truth. He steals Mr. Monroe's towel and tries to sort of ham it up impersonating Dracula to kind of let them know, try and, tell them what's up. But the humans don't understand. Harold suggests he tries something else. Chester hypnotizes him with his eyes and bites his neck, but they still don't get it. They think Chester is cold and wants attention, so they hug him and put on his little sweater, which is purple and yellow with mice and cowboy hats. He hides under the couch in sort of embarrassment and annoyance, and Harold suggests that if he stands in front of the rabbit cage, Bunnicula will laugh to death over the sweater. Chester tells him essentially to laugh it up, fuzzball, and is determined to save the family on his own. After a snack, anyway. That night, Harold is woken by little noises and a strange smell. He goes downstairs to see that Chester has put garlic all over the place and has made them all garlic necklaces, and it smells really, really strong. Harold goes to nap outside, and Bunnicula hides in his cage. But Harold's sleep is disturbed yet again by screams in the morning, and inside Chester has been given a bath to wash off the garlic. All of it is taken down, taken away, and now Bunnicula can strike again. So Chester has to have another idea. After the humans leave for the day, he enlists Harold to get Bunnicula out of his cage while he goes and gets the steak from the kitchen that was defrosting on the counter for dinner that night. But Harold gets his head stuck in the cage trying to get the bunny out and is distracted by wanting to know who gets the steak. Eventually they're untangled and Chester asks Harold to read the directions to him in the vampire book. So to quote the book again. "Start at the top of the page," Chester said, as he picked up the steak. "Why don't you read, and I'll hold the steak?" Chester replied. I took it to mean that I was to start reading. "To destroy the vampire and end his reign of terror, it's necessary to pound a sharp steak." Chester interrupted. "A sharp steak? What does that mean?" "I'll taste it and tell you if it's sharp," I offered. "Oh, never mind. This will do. It's sirloin. Keep reading. To pound a sharp steak into the vampire's heart. This must be done during the daylight hours when the vampire has no powers." "Okay," he said, "this is it. I'm sorry it had to go this far, but if they'd listened, this wouldn't have been necessary." He dragged the steak across the floor and laid it across the inert bunny. Then with his paws, he began to hit the steak. "Are you sure this is what they mean, Chester?" "Am I anywhere near his heart?" he asked. "It's hard to tell," I said. "All you can really see are his nose and ears. You know, he's really sort of cute." Chester was getting that glint in his eyes again. He was pounding away at the steak harder and harder. "Be careful," I said. "You'll hurt him." Chester increased his attack. I was really getting worried when the door opened and Mr. and Mrs. Monroe suddenly were with us in the room. So they basically slap the steak on the sleeping bunny and smack it. This made me laugh because I've seen my cat Grim sort of smack things with his foot. I don't know if you have a cat, you kind of know the gesture that they do, and it's just kind of hilarious. So that was a great visual for me. And of course, they're stopped when the adults return. As one last effort, Chester throws water at the vampire bunny, but misses and wets Harold. He's unceremoniously put outside for the night, and Bunnicula is put back in his cage. Harold is happy to get his chompers on the ruined steak, and Chester looks in miserably from the outside. Poor Chester. Quote, "In the days that followed, Chester's behavior was exemplary. He purred and he cooed and he cleaned his paws and he rubbed up against everyone's legs to show what a good boy he was." I was getting worried. Chester acts that way only when he has something devious in the back of his mind, but I didn't know what it was. He had tried everything in the book to get rid of vampires and all his efforts had failed, but I knew from the expression on his face that something was definitely up. Of course, I didn't know for certain because he had not spoken to me since the steak incident. So at this point, Harold has sort of developed a soft spot for the little bunny, and he tries to chat to him a little bit and make friends. So Chester ignores them both. Then Harold notices that the vegetables aren't being turned white, and Bunnicula seems listless. Is he sick? He tries to let Toby know, unsuccessfully. Later that night, he walks in to see Chester with garlic around his neck, blocking the kitchen door. So Bunnicula is being starved. Harold decides to help Bunnicula. After all, he doesn't believe he has plans for world domination, but just to harm vegetables from the fridge. He decides to try and get Bunnicula to the salad on the table the next evening while the rest of the family are preoccupied. It has dressing on it, so he feels that they won't notice if it's turned white, and if he times it right, no one will know. He checks where everyone is, waits for his moment when Chester is asleep, and manages to sneak into the dining room and get the bunny onto the table. But then Chester comes in and pounces, stopping the rabbit. Bunnicula jumps free, and Harold decides to bark and alert the family so that Chester can't sort of make his final pounce. Chester gets blamed for the salad just being everywhere, but they notice that Bunnicula looks kind of sick. They decide to bathe Chester again, his poor cat, and take all three of them to the vet in the morning. So at this point, Harold wonders how things will ever be okay again. He and Chester are fighting, and the cat seems to not be his friend anymore. But his new bunny friend seems like he's really sick, and Harold has to go to the vet. So things are hopeless, but the vet gives Bunnicula carrot juice, and he sends Chester to a therapist. And Harold finds out that all of his shots are up to date. So instead of having to be vaccinated, he gets a cookie. It turns out that the family see that Bunnicula is happy on a liquid diet, so they give him that going forward, and there's no more weird white food in the kitchen in the mornings. The family never find out that he's a vampire bunny. Bunnicula and Howe become very good friends, although the rabbit doesn't talk. And since therapy, Chester has given up on all the spooky books and now reads things like Finding Yourself by Screaming a Lot and speaks in sort of psychobabble. And that's how the book ends. That is the story of Bunnicula. So maybe what comes across in that sort of plot summary, you kind of get a sense of it, but the gentle humor in this book is really fun. It sort of has almost like a bit of a bantery kind of vibe to it. The way that Harold takes himself seriously as like the family dog, but misunderstands things and doesn't know the words for things. It's really cute. It's quite funny. And then there are just those playful little jokes about dogs and cats. Like, we know cats hate baths and that dogs are very snack motivated. So that's sort of like a running theme of those two characters. And it's just a lovely little story. It's quite simple. The two brothers bicker all the time, which is quite funny too. Yeah, I think we're meant to know that Bunnicula is a vampire. But the way the book is written, there's also the idea that you could see it as sort of saying that, vampires aren't real and it's just all in Chester's head. And I think that's interesting because I think it means that little kids, if they're really young and you're sort of trying to teach them that monsters aren't real and there's nothing to be afraid of, you can kind of be like, oh, like Chester just made it all up or whatever. But also you could believe that, he really is a vampire bunny. So I think that's really nice. It's a lovely little story, very light and fun, even though it has a simplicity to it. You do get a sense of all the different characters being unique and having like their own little personalities, which is pretty impressive considering how thin this book is. So, did you read Bunnicula as a kid? Do you know this one? Have you read this one? Do you remember the illustrations? Please let me know what you thought of this book in the comments. And let me know what you think about this one. I remember reading Bunnicula. I vaguely remember reading this when I was a little kid. And it was kind of fun to read again because it's sort of, some of these books are kind of funny to read as an adult. But I didn't read anything, any of the sequels or the TV shows or anything like that. So if you have, let me know what you thought of all that stuff. So come join me in the comments and have a little chat about the book if you feel like it. And if you liked this one, give it a little like, maybe subscribe if you kind of enjoy my content. Love to have you along. And thank you for watching.